Welcome to World Affairs Today, brought to you by the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C., a leading forum for global education and international affairs.
Good evening, and welcome to the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C. Our program this evening is entitled, After Bin Laden, the Role of Intelligence and Special Ops in U.S. Foreign Policy. Our guests are Dr. Michael Scheuer, the Honorable Thomas O'Connell, and Kimberly Dozier. I am Heidi Shoup, President of the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C., and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening and to introduce our program. We are delighted to have with us Kimberly Dozier, currently an Associated Press correspondent covering intelligence and counterterrorism in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. She previously served as CBS News chief reporter in Iraq, and in 2006, when the patrol in which she was traveling was attacked and several of her CBS crew members were killed, Ms. Dozier herself was critically injured, and you may recall the news coverage at that time. In 2008, she published an account of her experiences breathing the fire, fighting to report and survive the war in Iraq. Tonight, she is here with us to moderate a discussion of the future of special forces in U.S. foreign policy and related questions regarding national sovereignty, rule of law, and more. She will introduce our other speakers. Please join me in welcoming Kimberly Dozier and our distinguished panel.
Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to some great questions from the crowd for our panelists and to hearing what they have to say at this particular juncture when everything is changing in the world of counterterrorism, yet some things are going to be staying the same. Now, we'll first hear from the Honorable Thomas O'Connell, known as OC to his friends. He served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict from 2003 to 2007. Now, that covers an era of what some would call a revolution in the field, when the Joint Special Operations Command started changing the way counterterrorism is done, fusing operations and intelligence into something General Stanley McChrystal calls a counter-network. Build a network to chase a network. OC is a retired Army U.S. colonel whose 27-year career included a 3-year assignment as Deputy for Command Support at the CIA. He's currently on the board of EMS Technologies, and he keeps in touch with folks in all elements of national security to stay current. Michael Scheuer worked with the CIA for 22 years as head of the Directorate of Intelligence and the Directorate of Operations. He was the head of the CIA's first bin Laden unit from 1996 to 1999. He lived through the scramble to track down those responsible after the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. And he became a public figure after being outed as the anonymous author of the 2004 book Imperial Hubris, in which he criticized many of the U.S. Assumptions about Islamist insurgencies, and particularly about Osama bin Laden. I have been told by many in the field that it is a must-read if you want to understand militancy. His most recent book on the subject, which I have highlighted on my bookshelf, is Osama bin Laden. Now, with that, we hear first from Tom O'Connell.
Thanks very much, Kim, and Heidi, thank you, and the World Affairs Council of D.C. For sponsoring this panel tonight. I must admit that I did not expect such a young audience. I only see a few folks with gray hair or no hair. So I look for some lively questions. I thought it would be useful tonight to take a few slides from the United States Special Operations Command brief and just go over some of the organizations and missions that the United States government has given our special forces. Few historical references to how things got started, few items about legislation, and I'll flip through these quickly, and if you need to go back to one later in the Q&A, I think we can do that. So for the younger folks in the audience, what are special forces? Again, we're talking about the United States Special Operations Command currently headquartered in Tampa, Florida. You might remember back to 1981 when about 3,000 Iranian militants seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. 66 hostages held, and that led to Operation Eagle Claw, also known as Desert One, where we put a Special Forces team together from virtually all services and attempted to effect a rescue attempt. It resulted in a collision of aircraft in a clandestine desert site. It was a sad day for U.S. Special Forces, but it was a good day in some other respects in that that single event led to some of the successes that we're having today. And it wasn't the Defense Department that came up with this. It really was the Congress and the Holloway Commission report that forced the changes that exist until to this day. The National Defense Authorization Act of 1986 was really the catalyst for the organizations that we have today. You'll see that it created the United States Special Operations Command, and it also created an element in the Pentagon that I was fortunate enough to serve in, and that is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict. And for some unknown reason, over the last few years, they've added words to make the title even longer, interdependent capabilities, and no one to this day has been able to tell me what the heck that means. When we talk about the commands that exist within the Defense Department, you'll see the United States Special Operations Command listed here, second row. So you see that they're a 4-star command, and they report directly to the Secretary of Defense. SOCOM is truly a unique organization. It's a unified combatant command. It commands all U.S.-based Special Operations Forces. It synchronizes planning for global operations against terrorist networks. It deploys our Special Operations Forces to support the global combatant commands. And as directed, it conducts operations and executes pre-crisis activities as well as crisis activities. It has legislated military department-like authorities, which include organize, train, and equip Special Operations Forces, develop Special Operations Forces strategy, doctrine, tactics, program and budget for Special Operations, and this is key because Special Operations Forces have their own Major Force Program 11, which has been critical to some of their rapid procurement and successful acquisitions. They monitor and manage SOF personnel. They ensure interoperability and, of course, conduct audits. Mission statement of United States Special Operations Command is shown here. It provides fully capable and enabled Special Operations Forces to defend the nation's interests in an environment characterized by irregular warfare. And again, it synchronizes DoD planning for global operations against terrorist networks. Now here are the SOF Core Activities, and there are 12 of them. Direct action, just like we saw recently in the operation against Osama bin Laden. Special reconnaissance, unconventional warfare, foreign internal defense. Some of these definitions overlap somewhat. Military information support operations was formerly known as PSYOPs. Counterproliferation of weapons of mass destruction, critical mission. And on the bottom there, activity specified by the President or the Secretary of Defense. This is a SOF team. You'll see that there's an Army component, a Navy component, which includes our SEALs, an Air Force Special Operations component, a Marine Corps component, the Joint Special Operations Command, and SOCOM also has its own university that recently moved to Tampa at MacDill Air Force Base. The elements, Army Special Operations Command, located at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Naval Special Warfare Command, Coronado, California, Air Force Special Operations Command headquartered at Hurlburt Field. USSOCOM's headquartered at Tampa. Marine Corps Special Operations Command at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and the Joint Special Operations Command at Fort Bragg. Every theater also has a special operations component assigned to the theater commanders. One at SOC Cent for Central Command at Tampa, SOC PAC in Hawaii, SOC South at Homestead Air Force Base in Florida, SOC Scheuer, which is located in Stuttgart, Germany, SOC AFRICOM, which is the newest combatant command, also located in Stuttgart, and a Special Operations Command element in Korea. There's also, for Joint Forces Command, a small element located in Norfolk. Let's just look at where the SOF forces are today. This is deployments for the week of 28 May through 3 June, but it's pretty close to what we have today. And you'll see that by far the Central Command area of operation has the heaviest demand on our Special Operations Forces. This shows the average of our Special Operations Forces numbers that are deployed overseas. We have about 52,000 Special Operations Forces right now. 2/3 of them are active duty, 1/3 is in the reserves. And of those 52,000 people, and that number will go hopefully within the next couple of years up to about 58,000, of that number, about 16,000 are what we call operators, the trigger pullers, the aviators, and the rest of the personnel have different type of missions, mostly in the support area. SOF is a uniquely capable force. I'm talking about our Rangers, our Army Green Berets, our Civil Affairs and Psychological Operations troops, our Army Special Operations Aviation elements, our Air Force component, which has pararescue, weathermen, combat controllers, aviators that fly everything from the AC-130 gunship to the CV-22 tilt-rotor aircraft. We have Marine Corps Special Operations, which is our newest component, operating out of Camp Lejeune, that is still really, I think, finding their way and reorganizing to be extremely effective on the battlefield. And of course, then we have our Naval Special Warfare, which has everything from the conventional SEALs to underwater delivery vehicles and special boat units. So it's important to remember that our Special Operations Forces are all volunteered, they're all specially selected. They are some of the most intelligent and cunning people you will come across. High individual skills, develop well into teams, and from a start to finish, it can take a minimum of 2 years before you get a special operator out there in the field, but more likely 3 to 4 to even 5 years before an individual is fully trained. Special Operations Forces like to say that they have soft truths, and these are 4 that pretty much have remained constant since Special Operations was founded in Special Operations Command was founded in 1986. Humans more important than hardware, quality better than quantity. Special Operations Forces cannot be mass-produced. Competent Special Operations Forces cannot be created after emergencies occur, and most SOF operations require non-SOF support. Just to give you a little bit of reflection on my career, when that terrible accident took place in the desert in Iran, a guy named Charlie Beckwith, who commanded Delta Force at the time, came over to brief the head of the Special Air Service in the United Kingdom, a guy named Michael Rose. I happened to be assigned to the British Army at that time on exchange. And Charlie Beckwith was talking about his intelligence problems, getting in and out of the desert, things he wished he had done better. Remember, the British had just pulled off a very successful operation in London when they took down Princess Gate, the Iranian embassy that had been captured by dissidents. Special Air Service on live TV took that down. So Beckwith was over talking to his counterpart Mike Rose, and unfortunately then Lieutenant Colonel Rose told Charlie Beckwith, geez, I've got a very good intelligence Yankee here named O'Connell. And I didn't know Charlie Beckwith. I didn't know that Rose had told him that. But 2 nights later, I got a knock on the door. And my wife has not forgiven me to this day. I was en route to Fort Bragg and spent really the rest of my career on that side of the street. So it's funny how events can change your career overnight when you think there's no possibility of that happening. Last thing I just want to say is, during my time serving as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, it was an immense honor to be able to be among the troops, to observe their training, observe some live missions. Very high honor indeed. I don't ever expect that I'll get another chance like that in my lifetime. We can talk a little bit about when Dr. Scheuer talks about the hunt and some of the aspects that went along with the bin Laden mission. And I can talk about some of the things that special operations do in preparations for missions like that. So, Kimberly, if that's okay with you, I'll end on that note and let you take over.
Sounds great. For anyone who didn't pick up on that, when he got drafted to Fort Bragg, that meant he went to the dark side of special operations for the rest of his career, to the elite forces. I can say that, you
Thank
can't.
You. Okay. I know Kim pretty well, and I can take a ribbing.
Dr. Scheuer, your turn.
Yeah, I wasn't going to talk about the bin Laden operation specifically, except to say that it was, I think, a long time coming and certainly well done by both the agency and the special forces. It went rapidly downhill when the Marx Brothers took over, running the post, leaks, wrong stories, incomplete stories. So the edge of the success was sort of taken off. The biggest problem with the operation was that it will reinforce the thought of those here in Washington, in the military and in the CIA, that we can, as President Bush used to say, kill them or bring them to justice one at a time. If we choose that path, which we have been on now since the summer of 1995, we will continue to lose as we are today. In the summer of 1995, I began a program which has been indeed wildly successful and wildly unpopular, called the Rendition Program at CIA. That program, in and of itself, inflicted more damage on al-Qaeda before 9/11 than any amount of damage we ever inflicted on a terrorist group before in the history of our fight against terrorism. And yet, 9/11 came off. 10 years later, they're still in the field against us. And what I was going to suggest tonight is that the special forces of the United States and the intelligence community of the United States are being run ragged in an effort to defeat an enemy which our leaders don't understand, either in terms of motivation or in terms of dimension. And as long as we pursue that particular method of operation, we're only fooling ourselves. Americans are very prone to look at problems in a legalistic way. I, 1,000 years ago when I was young, was teased on Marshall Dillon and Gunsmoke and Bonanza and the rest of the Westerns. And the story is very simple and much like the cops and robbers show today. You chase someone, you find him, you capture him, you convict him, you hang him, and that's the end of the story, and it brings closure. We are reenacting that every day in every field against this enemy, and yet the enemy is far bigger than it was 15 years ago. And so we're on a failing course, certainly in terms of the amount of force brought to bear against the enemy has been severely insufficient. In the summer of '97, I wrote a memorandum to the Director of Central Intelligence, which is noted in the 9/11 Commission report, saying that the organization we faced, al-Qaeda with its allies, certainly could never be handled and defeated by the intelligence service of the United States, and that not even with the special forces probably could it be defeated. And today I believe that more strongly than I did then. We have rejoiced over the killing of Osama bin Laden, I think rightfully so, although it led to some people believing the problem we face against Islamists is somehow diminished by his death. It certainly is made less well led by his death, but the problem remains fairly significant. And if you take the a simple exercise of map reading, at 9/11, we in the United States, in the intelligence community and the military services, were facing an enemy that was constricted primarily to Afghanistan in terms of operations, manpower, supply caches, planning. Today, they still have part of Afghanistan. They have a large part of Pakistan. They have increasing amounts of Yemen. Their presence in Somalia is growing. They're clearly on the rebound in Iraq. Their expansion across North Africa is significant. And to imagine somehow that all of those things can be handled in the kill them or capture them one at a time approach is, to say the least, a very hopeful approach to this problem. In terms of geographical reach, in terms of numbers, in terms of size of the organization, it's much larger than it was today than it was at 9/11. And perhaps more important, it has allies who now have international reach. The Pakistani group, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, has received a lot of press recently, and I think it's just one of several that can reach out beyond the Middle East. The Arab Spring, for both the Special Forces and the U.S. intelligence community, has been an unmitigated disaster. We have lost so far, whether you like those governments or not, 4 governments who were expressly eager to help us destroy al-Qaeda and other organizations. Mr. Gaddafi, certainly Mr. Mubarak, Ben Ali in a quiet way, and Saleh, we put a lot of money on a bad horse, but he was still doing something for us. And of course, we started it off much earlier by destroying our best ally against this group, Saddam Hussein. So we're really, we're kind of in a fix at the moment. We now, in the Central Intelligence Agency and other intelligence communities, have to pick up the work that was being done with us or for us by the intelligence services of Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, and Yemen. We also face, in each of those countries, an enormous problem in terms of armaments, arsenals, police stations, factories. In all of those places were raided, and shipments, convoys of our ordnance and weaponry were taken out to places to be used at a later date. In each of those countries, prisons were either opened up by the governments as they were falling, or were cracked open by demonstrators who apparently were either not as secular democratic as we think, or were just misled. In Egypt alone, the estimate is up to 40,000 people, Islamists, were released, including some of the people that I helped to put into prison there. So when you look at the field today that the Special Forces and the Central Intelligence Agency and and the other components in the intelligence community face, it's an overwhelming problem. And when you add to that another problem we didn't have at 9/11, which is the extraordinary growth in the popularity of Islamism, militant Islam within the United States. Perhaps the most damaging legacy of bin Laden over the last 5 years, what he left behind, was the slow but sure building of a media operation made up of U.S. Muslims who can speak the vernacular, who are very competent in media, and who have already shown an ability to encourage, instigate, or incite people in the United States to attack here at home. That's something, of course, that won't fall to the lot of the CIA to look after, but I think I will live long enough to see U.S. armed forces fighting inside the United States to confront these forces. So I'll end with that kind of, I think, a rather grim picture. And I would argue that the military of the United States, both conventional and special forces, and the intelligence community of the United States have been, by their last 4 presidents, served very badly in terms of the way this war is framed. The parts of the government I just mentioned are fighting an enemy that is motivated by what the United States government does in the Muslim world, by its support for the Saudis, by its presence on the Arabian Peninsula, by the wars we're conducting in Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, by our unqualified support for the Israelis. As long as that foreign policy remains a status quo policy, we will never be able to stem the growth in the next generations down the road of people who will take up arms in the cause that bin Laden declared war on us for in August of 1996.
Well, as moderator, I'm going to take a shot at the first question. We'll put a microphone out in the crowd. When I get questions from you all, I just ask if the question becomes a statement, I will wrap you up and ask you to move on. I started this out by saying that some things remain the same and some are different. We're still fighting al-Qaeda. It's got, as of today, confirmed different leadership. We have Ayman al-Zawahiri, the Egyptian, at the helm. Mike, what do you think that's going to do to the organization?
I think it took a long time to decide on Zawahiri. Zawahiri has a reputation of being very much an aggressive, fierce kind of individual, not the engaging person that bin Laden is. He also has the handicap of being an Egyptian and never letting anyone forget that he is an Egyptian. And Egypt has been there for 4,000 years, and Yemen is a new country on the block, and that kind of thing. He's a very professional man. I think that he is likely to preside over a discussion which will yield a move away from bin Laden's focus on another large attack in the United States and move more toward Hamas-like attacks in the United States, IEDs and events like Major Hassan and the fellow in the Times Square would-be bombing. I think he has to be careful. I think we should take a little bit of hope, and hope he has not changed over the last 10 years, because I think his personality would be such that it would grow some animosity toward him within the organization. I think the really important point is in the next couple of days or weeks, who is his deputy? There are some very talented people out there. One is a man named Abu Yaha al-Libi, who is actually number 3 in the organization at the moment. And the fellow I would watch is the head of al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula, a man named Abu Ayhashi, who was bin Laden's private secretary, an eloquent speaker of Arabic, and also a very talented military commander.
By the way, you might have noticed we pronounce Zawahiri different ways. I have been told, depending on which organization I'm working for, 3 different ways to pronounce that name. Same thing with Arabic transliterations of some of these names. You'll notice from news organization to news organization, each of us decide on a standard. We don't call each other up and agree, though. So, Tom, I have to ask you, from the Special Operations perspective, after the bin Laden raid, and with so much detail out about it, how has that either endangered what special operators do overseas, or reinforced the choice of going with direct action versus the other things that special operations does?
Good question, Kim. I think that there's no mistake as to why direct action is right there up at the top in terms of Special Operations Forces core missions. That's probably the most difficult, the one that takes the most training, the one that takes usually the most intelligence, and it's something we always have to be prepared to do. That brings good things with it because there's an exceptionally high degree of training. People that want that type of challenge gravitate towards taking on the toughest possible missions that they can. So there's some positives that come with it. I can remember after the Iran rescue attempt that there was a lot of concern because news media in North Carolina, local stations, were trying to identify specific operators that had been on the mission, put their faces in the paper, report on where they lived, and obviously that's not something that a special operator wants out there in the media.
That's because, of course, you mentioned that while USSOCOM is based in Tampa, one of their other major centers is Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Right. Yes, and that's where the majority of the Army headquarters and other elements are. In one case, I think that the effort to go after bin Laden and what happens afterwards is almost a perfect opportunity for something that I don't think we've done as well as we could have done or could do. And that is, if you look back in the decades, and Mike talked about the importance of foreign liaison services, even though they might not be your friend every day on the front page of the New York Times, they do serve very useful purposes.
You mean in terms of like working alongside the Pakistani Inter-Services
Well, yes, but we have trained special forces and security forces from the Philippines to Kenya over the last decades. And you will find a cadre of very, very capable and dedicated, in some cases retired, intelligence personnel, special operators, who would love to assist the U.S. And if we could put together a team of people that don't have to be very highly vetted, and in many cases do not have the type of trails, electronic trails that Americans have, I think we can put together a force that will make it very difficult for al-Qaeda to gain a permanent sanctuary and not feel that they have to look over their shoulder every time. I really think it can be done. There's people out there that are more than willing to do it. We have the capability within the intel services and within special operations forces to put this type of capability together. Tagging, tracking, locating, 24-hour surveillance. They don't have to be highly trained to do this. They just have to be trustworthy. We can vet them. But there's literally thousands and thousands of assets like that we could use in this fight. There's a problem, and that problem is turf. Mike knows it exists. I know it exists. Maybe we can move ahead on something like that in the future. The other thing I wanted to mention that we don't look hard enough at is finances. These people can't operate without some type of financial resource. And I think you may have seen the other day where the Pentagon decided that dealing with threat finance was really not a defense mission. Economic warfare is a form of irregular warfare, and I think it is a legitimate defense mission.
I'd like to ask Mr. Scheuer, for how long can the U.S. deny the fact that the ISI is an Islamic terrorist outfit? My second question to the Honorable Mr. O'Connell is, what's the wisdom of using conventional military to fight clandestine foreign terrorist organizations?
When you look at what the Pakistanis have done for us since 9/11, they help us wreck a perfect government for them in Afghanistan in the form of the Taliban. They allowed us to expand our intelligence and our military presence in their country. We had virtually free overflight rights. We've turned part of Karachi into a NATO naval base. And most of all, Musharraf and now the gangster we put into power there, what's his name?
Kiani?
No, Bhutto's husband, have sent the army into the border areas, which has brought them a civil war to their country. I think that we could look a long way to find any other ally that has helped us to that degree. It was never, from 9/11, in the interest of the Pakistani nation or government to turn over to us or kill Osama bin Laden. And had we had adults in the White House at any time in the last 3 administrations, we would have known that. And we would have realized that at some point the Cold War is over, adulthood is again valued in leaders, and we would take our own part in things and not depend on third world dictators to do our business. So I don't have much use for the idea that the Pakistanis are not helping us. They're helping us to the extent that it's in their interest to do so. It would be just as feckless, I think, to expect the CIA or the MI6 to accept a tasking for a foreign government that runs contrary to their country's interests.
How about the charge that the ISI shelters and even in some cases actively helps the Haqqani network, which is shipping explosives, manpower, weaponry into Afghanistan, killing U.S. troops?
We're in the way, aren't we? We went there on a 15-month mission. We're now there 10 years. We're going to leave the Pakistanis holding the bag with an extraordinary mess in their country. They will not tolerate, they cannot tolerate from a security perspective the survival of Karzai or anything resembling him, which is allied with Iran, with Russia, especially with the Indians. You know, again, it's an adult world. And the Pakistanis need a government in Afghanistan that will suit their interests and protect their western border and keep it quiet.
So supporting the Haqqanis means defeating Karzai?
It means defeating Karzai, and we have surrendered. They know we're not going to clean up the problem. We're just going to leave, and the problem will be there for them to clean up. And they have to look out for themselves. What they say, it's a rough neighborhood. So I don't think it's surprising that they're helping Haqqani and the other folks.
Tom, how about the notion that we're using the military to fight a terrorist organization?
I think there are circumstances where conventional forces, primarily ground units, can be used effectively in overwatch, in surveillance, in looking at large areas, preventing movement, etc. Becomes more problematic when you try to have conventional forces with an active hand amongst a population, because that requires really a good deal of sophisticated training. And I often thought during my visits to Iraq that it would have been much more effective to take those brigade combat teams, which in some cases were 5,000 people in conventional soldiers, in forward operating bases or in major bases that didn't seem to be having much of an impact on the population. They would go out, a lot of patrols, a lot of ambush. Interaction with the various Iraqi population was in some cases problematic, whereas if you looked at how the Green Berets operated with a cultural awareness, interacting and being close to the Iraqi forces that they were trying to train, you saw that that was probably a much more effective approach. But is there a use for conventional forces in terrorist situations? Oftentimes, yes. Is it ideal? Probably not.
I think one of the most damaging things to American security is to continue to call the Taliban or the Lashkar-e-Taiba or al-Qaeda terrorist organizations. If they were terrorist organizations, they would be destroyed by now. There's no terrorist organization that could absorb the punishment the U.S. military, for example, inflicted on the Taliban after 9/11. They're insurgents. They're soldiers without uniforms. You know, if we would simply stand back for a moment and say, how many times have you heard a number 2 or a number 3 or a number 4 of al-Qaeda killed in the past decade? Dozens, hundreds, whatever you want to call it. And yet the organization goes on. Same thing with different groups around the world, Islamist groups. Terrorism is a term that certainly is applied to people you don't like. people you want to delegitimize. But in the United States, it's also used to quash any debate about what you're doing, because a terrorist certainly can't say anything that's worth hearing, so why bother to listen what they say? Well, why bother is it gives you an idea of how poorly our politicians have used the bully pulpit to educate Americans. There's virtually nothing in the rhetoric of Osama bin Laden or Ayman Zawahiri or the LET guys or anyone else that talks about we're going to attack those Americans because the Iowans vote early in presidential primaries every 4 years, or we hate liberty, or we hate women in the workplace. We're being attacked because of our foreign policy, because of what the U.S. government does in the Muslim world. And until we understand that, we can't win. And until we listen to what the enemy says, we can't understand what he's up to. And as long as we call them terrorists, we won't listen. And so it's an endless problem, which leads eventually to more blood and loss of money in the United States.
You mentioned just now that the terrorist, quote-unquote, organizations have serious political policy problems with the United States. And you also mentioned earlier the Arab Spring. I'm wondering, since the United States didn't choose to really get heavily involved in Egypt, since we basically spearheaded the movement to bomb Libya, and our actions in Tunisia weren't really there at all, do you think that that does show a slight change in U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East that would address some of the issues of al-Qaeda and these other networks?
We are kind of floundering around in a belief that democracy is on the way in the Middle East. I think that's very unlikely. In most of those countries, the people who will have the power when the dust settles are either the military or the Islamists. Will it help? I guess I would turn the question around and say, what will we accept? Mrs. Clinton and the president have declared kind of a cultural war on Islam in terms of women's rights and other things that they're demanding now. What are we going to accept? Will we accept a moderate Egyptian government led by or at least influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood?
But Mike, don't you mean, Islamist versus Islamic militant? Isn't there a distinction to be made?
There's a distinction to be made, but not a distinction that apparently that the president or anybody in the United States recognizes, or any in the political establishment. When you read Obama's speech of the 19th of May, for example, he outbushed Bush and the neoconservatives. He called for regime change in 5 countries. He said, women have to have the same rights in Kandahar as they have in Milwaukee. He, at the moment, with Cameron and Sarkozy, are the chief recruiting sergeants for al-Qaeda and the Islamists generally.
Because you're saying it sounds like they're attacking the institutions of Islam as opposed to attacking the militant
They
portions.
are indeed, and I think I would be extremely critical of the way the coverage of the Arab Spring was handled by the media. They went to Tahrir Square and interviewed 200, maybe over 18 days, well-groomed, English-speaking, pro-democracy, professional, educated, young Egyptians, and then ran and read their Facebooks and their Twitters, and then extrapolated that over 85 million mostly illiterate Egyptians as the wave of the future. And I think the media generally, with respect, became cheerleaders rather than journalists.
I was in Afghanistan at the time, hanging out with special operations folks.
What advice would you have for someone who's quite desperate to change this status quo foreign policy of which you speak for more reasons besides the ones you mentioned, and is also desperately trying to get a job so that I can change it in some small way?
There won't be any change in our foreign policy until there's another calamity in the United States. We are absolutely, in most areas of our policy, whether it is economic or borders or warfare, policy doesn't change unless there's a calamity. And it may be that I'm just almost 60 and have become terminally cynical. But we live in a world that exists only in our own minds in terms of our policy makers. And I don't know how you change that except with a disaster.
So I've read that these types of terror networks are pretty interesting organizations in that they don't really have a cohesive hierarchy. So Osama bin Laden is really more of a figurehead than anything. So if this is true, then does killing Osama bin Laden have any true, like, does it change the situation significantly? And also, if there's no true leader we can hunt down and kill, then exactly how effective will these types of direct action special ops be in the long term?
A group that organizes terror activities, has a structure. They have finances, they have leadership, they have support, they have safe houses, they have propaganda machines. I've always found it remarkable that when there's a suicide bombing and the family is praised, oh, you've produced a martyred son, why we haven't been able to turn that around. Really, a lot of these kids that take on the suicide mission are at the lower level of the social spectrum, are really not that bright. And the families really ought to be embarrassed that the kid was duped into a suicide mission. But instead, we allow this to go on and let them be glorified. I think we have a real prison recruiting problem in this country, not only state but federal prisons as well. And once those people are out, if they've been radicalized in prison, they certainly have gotten a heck of a lot of good training on how to cause mayhem. And I think most citizens know, just from looking around at this open society, it's relatively easy for one or two people to cause a tremendous amount of damage. I don't know if you were in town, how many years ago was the sniper we had here in D.C., but it was not a fun time. And that was a couple guys in a car randomly going around, and I'll tell you, it was not a fun place to be. So we've got some real issues.
Mr. Scheuer, you spoke very warmly of the rendition program as it used to exist. I wonder if you could elaborate why you think it worked so well and talk about some of the problems that have made it difficult, if not impossible, to continue, such as dealing with our allied countries, Germany and Italy, for example, where it was extremely unpopular, and instances of picking up the wrong man.
Pick up wrong people, you kill wrong people. That's the way war goes. You know, we have educated three generations of Americans to believe that war could be a less than bloody, less than full of mistakes. The rendition program was designed for Mr. Clinton to do two things: to begin to dismantle al-Qaeda cells around the world by taking people off the street who were a threat to the United States, and to grab from them at the time whatever electronic or paper documents they had. Mr. Clinton did not want to hold anyone, and so he delivered them to Egypt or Saudi Arabia or somewhere else. So interrogation was never in the cards for us. It was designed to be a complement to a larger U.S. government counterterrorism effort. It turned out to be the U.S. counterterrorism effort. When General Shelton was the Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman, he refused to use the special forces at any time to go after al-Qaeda or the Taliban or anyone else. So it became the hallmark program, and it was never enough. You cannot win anything with the rendition program. It's kind of a Dutch boy with fingers to stick in the dike, but you cannot, it won't win. It's like drones, it's like special forces, it won't win. It'll buy you time, it'll kill some of the enemy, but I think Mr. Obama made an enormous mistake by ending the program. The discussion between what kind of interrogations there should be is one thing. The stopping of the acquisition of people on the battlefield who you want off the battlefield is another. And throwing out one because you can't decide how you're going to handle a prisoner of war is, I think, a mistake for the United States. And we've seen it just recently some of the information that helped to capture Osama or kill Osama bin Laden came from people that were picked up in the rendition program. I don't know how they were interrogated. I don't know the point, whether it was enhanced interrogation or just a regular interrogation. But the point is, the people we now hold are fairly long in the tooth in terms of information that can help us. And when you don't have an ongoing inflow of people who you can talk to, then you are you're kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face.
How possible do either of you, this is open to anyone on the panel, think that it is that although there's a general consensus that the Pakistani government had no idea what was happening at the time, there has been some calling into question by certain people within the field. I quoted an article by The Guardian that was later vetted by Juan Cole, who's a respected name in the field of Middle East and South Asian studies, that says that the attack on OBL's fortress was pretty much in accordance with a agreement between President Bush and Pervez Musharraf in 2001, which later transferred over in 2008 with the change to civilian rule. And a quote from the article itself, later by Juan Cole, this is from Gilani himself, says that he told a U.S. official, "I don't care if they do it as long as they get the right people. We'll protest it in the National Assembly, then ignore it."
Oh, that's from WikiLeaks, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was one of the sources that they put there as well. I was just wondering what either of your takes on that is. And lastly, my question deals with the ISI itself. In either of your opinions, do you think that the ISI is subject to specific rogue elements? And if so, how large do you think that rogue element number is? Would it be like 2%, 0.2%, anything like that? Any estimates you might have? And how do we reconcile the fundamental difference in our interests with Pakistan's interests, for instance, in Afghanistan?
I believe that the Pakistanis certainly must have had fairly high assurance that if we knew Osama bin Laden was any place in Pakistan, that they could expect us to go after him. I mean, that was a given from the president. So should they have been surprised on that? You know, I would say no, and I'll leave the ISI.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a great deal of rogue in ISI. I think it's a very professional organization. It does what the military tells it to do. The military, since Zia's time in the 70s, has become increasingly Islamicized. It supported the Afghan Mujahideen, some of them who are now fighting us, so the relationship is very close there. All intelligence services probably have one or more rogue elements in it. So I can't, you can never rule it out. I think the way you deal with ISI is to decide, you can't reconcile Pakistani interests with ours because they're not reconcilable. And so if there's dirty work to do, we depend on ourselves and not on the Pakistanis. It's the only smart way to proceed, I think.
Do you believe that these terrorists, I guess you don't want me to call them, are only influenced by U.S. foreign policy or also by U.S. domestic policy? And what is the extent of change that the U.S. must make to our domestic and foreign policy? Because I believe that domestic policy also affects how we're perceived by these nations to improve our position if we wish to negotiate with these groups.
I don't know whether we can negotiate with them or not. I don't think we need to change our domestic policies at all. What we need to stop trying to do is impose our domestic policies on people who will fight them to the death. We should immediately stop exporting democracy. We should immediately stop trying to create women's rights in countries where people are going to fight them. Those are not national interests of the United States. Those are nice to haves. If we want to have fewer wars with Islam, then we accept some sort of an Islamic government where it springs up. The domestic policy, there's nobody out there, very few people out there who are going to blow themselves up because my daughters go to university. There's an enormous number of people who are ready to blow themselves up because we let the Israelis do whatever they want to do. And until we come to grips with that, it's madness. And if you want to look for an empirical example, our soldiers and Marines who have no business really nation building have scored enormous successes in Afghanistan. 2 to 3 million more children in school, much more electricity, fundamental primary medical care more available than it's ever been before. restore irrigation ditches that the Soviets destroyed in their war, more paved roads. And as of all of those successes have accumulated, the insurgency has spread geographically and become more intense. So nation building, as long as it employs our way of thinking, our way of living, is not taking hold in Afghanistan, and it won't take hold anywhere else.
There's a lesson really from the Cold War, and we're old enough to remember the mirror imaging. It was very difficult for foreign policymakers and for serious scholars to stop the U.S. population, U.S. politicians, U.S. military from thinking, why do the Soviets think that way? Don't they see what they're doing is destructive, evil, whatever? And the answer is no. They don't think like us, we don't think like them. And if we assume that they think like us, we're going to miss the point. And that was a very, very difficult issue to get your hand around. And there's some similarity today.
Yeah.
Do you believe that Special Operations Forces represent a revolution in military affairs in the sense that they have led to a capacity of, I believe the definition is several orders of magnitude greater than what we had before?
I think it has contributed. One, you got people that are willing to take risks. Two, you have a much streamlined, it should have been much more streamlined, but a streamlined budget process that allows us to operate inside the turning circle of the normal acquisition process. The other thing that sometimes we don't think about is that if you put all this talent together, talent tends to beget talent, and talent working together can come up with some amazing ideas and some things that you just didn't think about. They also are becoming much more technically competent. The kids coming in today, have the IT skills that we didn't have. I can remember when I was at Fort Leavenworth, we literally had punch card computers and had to learn how to do that. So, I mean, the leaps ahead are just incredible. The iPhone, Army soldiers are going to have an iPhone that if they want to look at a certain area, that iPhone will pick out the best surveillance and get it right to that particular soldier. So fewer soldiers can do a lot more with some technology and the right type of weapon system. So yes, I think Special Ops has led a revolution in military affairs and will continue to as long as we enable them. Okay.
With that, I want to thank Tom O'Connell and Mike Scheuer for helping us look into what's next.
Thank you for joining us for World Affairs Today, a production of the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C. Stay connected with us at www.worldaffairstoday.org.